And we are live on Oz Property Investors. We bring the big names and we have the big fun. And we have one of the biggest names in property development in Australia. So I was reading it. I mean, I'd even say almost the world, but maybe that's it depends on how comfortable you feel about me saying that, Bob. But how you going, Bob?
Pretty good, thanks. Drop the world bit, I think.
Okay.
Australia, at least.
I did have a chat one night with the ex-president of the United States, a certain property developer from New York.
Oh, I think I might know who you're talking about. Has he written a few books and been on and fires people from shows, perhaps?
Yep, that's the man with the big flip over. Yeah, I didn't even realise he doesn't drink. It was a friend of mine introduced it. A couple of us ended up in Sydney when he was there one night with Robert Kiyosaki, and that's when I first found out the man doesn't even drink alcohol. I sort of it was a bit of a surprise.
There you go.
Yeah, anyway, all good. But don't worry about that.
A DT
that's
fun fact.
I'd much rather be with you guys anyway. So
yeah,
yes, because we
certainly partake in a beverage or two responsibly, of course. Not too much. How you going anyway, Joe? How's your day?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. I've been looking forward to this one. Bob, I've actually spoken to a number of your students in the property mastermind that you run, and they just rave about the course, and then they rave about what you do for them to help handhold through the whole development process. And everyone is always saying amazing things. So, we created this community for Jeff and I really to have these conversations, to have an excuse to talk to someone like you for an hour. Because if I just called you randomly, you would have just said no. So now you're locked in. So
you have to get through Hillary. That's all. If you can get through her, you've got me. No worries.
The
gatekeeper.
Yeah, I heard that. So everybody, if you have any questions, please put those in and comments, and of course the like. We love the like. But yeah, I'm excited to unpack the property development process and just also talk about development, because there's no one better, I'd say, to sort of, or there's no one has done as probably as many deals as Bob to sort of talk through that process. So it's going to be plenty of gold, and we're going to sort of cater to people from all walks of development experience. So I'm excited. So should we get into the quote of the week, Joe? And then we'll
do it.
What's
your Bob? You said your quote of the week is stuff that you bandy around the office a little bit. What have you got for
it's not so much a quote. I mean, it's something that's used 1,000 times by everybody every day. But I constantly say it to people because look, property development can have its problems. Okay, let's not say it's really simple and anyone could do it, which is where it comes from. The old saying, if it was easy, everyone would do it. And that's what I mean. And we keep telling ourselves that all the time, or I'm on the phone telling somebody, if it was easy, everyone would do it. That's when you get a problem. So it's not so much a saying of the week, but it's probably something that gets said quite a lot around the place, because there's always little snags, little detours, speed bumps you've got to get over. And it's true. If it was really easy, everyone would do it.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, because it's when the hard times come that you realize how hard it actually is. And then you think, actually, what I used to say to myself, like what I say to myself now still is, oh, it's at this point someone would have dropped off, and I'm now no longer competing with that group of people. And then I push forward. Now there's less people to compete against. So I'm actually in a good field right now. And then another snag, and you're like, oh gosh, this really would have stopped a lot of people. I better keep pushing so I can keep going. I like it.
Yeah, and you end up at the top of the tree by the sound of it, Joe. You must be top of the tree. All those people dropping off.
What happens at the top of the tree, though, Joe? What happens when the tree falls down?
You said it, not me. So I'll take that.
Take it as a compliment. It was meant to be.
No, I love it. Jeff, what is your quote of the week, mate? What have you put together for us?
Mine's much more long-winded, which I suppose shows that, just shows that I probably need to get a bit more simple to do it. But my one, I like to match it to the person coming on. So it's as a property developer, I learned a long time to choose your battles wisely, and that, unfortunately, compromise is a given. So that was Kevin McLeod, who he was the host of Grand Design. So I just thought that was quite profound, because I think it's when you're developing, when you're dealing with councils, when you're dealing with sort of all sorts of challenges, it pays into, well, which battles are you going to fight, and which ones are you just going to say, well, okay, we'll trade off that for this, and compromise will probably need to happen. So I wanted to highlight that.
I'm all for
How about you, Joe?
Mine is every problem has a solution. So when I do when I going through a pest and building report, for instance, and looking at a property, I know that there is going to be something that comes up. There's always stuff that comes up, especially if you're buying something that's 20, 30, 40 years old. But my saying is every problem has now it's not my saying, someone said it. Every problem has a solution. It just has a price attached to it. So if we can quantify what that number is, then we can say, well, that's a $2,000 problem. That means we need a $2,000 reduction or a $2,000. Are we willing to bite 2,000 to fix that thing? So it's not just saying this is broken, this is broken, this is broken, I can't do it. It's 500, 800, 600, 1,200, 2,000. Great. Now we've quantified it. Let's go. So that's my little quote of the week. What do you reckon, Bob? Got a laugh out of you?
Yeah, that's a good one. When Jeff started his one, my mind immediately went to councils, because, choose your battles. Yeah, it's always good fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what we'll do is we'll have a bit of we'll go into our ad just now and then go into a bit of an introduction of who this man is and why we are so pumped to have Bob Andersen on. And let's do it.
Get excited, Joe. Come on.
This live session is sponsored by Scott Agate from Hello House. Scott has created the world's first property negotiation as a service business. So what does that mean? Well, let's think about it. When was the last time you negotiated on anything over $100, let alone a property that is going to be one of the biggest investments of your life? The vendor, they have a trained negotiator on their side in the form of a real estate agent. That's kind of like you stepping into the ring with Mike Tyson after never training a day of boxing in your life. These guys are trained professionals, and that's what they do day in and day out. And this is what Hello House does every single day as well. They negotiate on property to get the best buy price from the real estate agents. Scott Agate, he's the expert negotiator. He has been in this industry since 1995. He owned and operated 3 Bell franchises. Scott was the guy that was teaching these real estate agents all these agent games. He knows all of their tricks. Having him on your side is going to give you a massive unfair advantage and literally save you tens of thousands of dollars. Unlike other ways of purchasing property, Scott's incentives are aligned with you, the buyer, meaning the more money he saves you, the more money he makes, which is what you want. You need to have those incentives aligned. Scott has kindly offered our group a massive discount on the retainer fee for his service. So if you're looking to buy your next home or investment property, click the link below to get in touch.
So we're updating our collateral there, but I've dropped the link to the Get Buyer Ready course, which also has a generous discount. But Bob, the person of the hour. So we have. So I was trying to find some little tidbits, but it was mostly business. But I did have one sneaky one in there at the end. So you are, over the last 3 decades, you've become a select group of Aussie property developers who've been involved in $1 billion worth of successful property development projects.
Crazy.
Or development projects, and including things such as high-rise CBD buildings, shopping centers, retirement complexes. I'm not going to name all those because there's just too many. But the thing I love about you is you're not just you have I'm sure you have many strings to your bow, but you have positive property strategies, which is, I suppose, you're doing about your business side of things. So you're actually still doing what you teach people, and you also have the property mastermind. So the thing that I found most interesting, most cool about you is that you love a cheeky beer. So beers with Bob, and sometimes a wine as well.
Yeah, I'll have to get back doing that. It's been quite a while since I've done one. I got this. I don't know if you noticed, but this is the Moffat Beach Brewery, and the name of this particular flavour is called Deadbeat Boyfriend. And Hillary bought me that. Bought me a 4-pack this afternoon. Well, I don't know why. Is there a message there or not?
What have you done, Bob? What have you done?
The beer tastes good anyway.
Yeah, wow. That's it.
Tastes like tears.
So we get started with we usually get started these sessions with the first. We love to go back right to the beginning, but I'm going to give you an option. You can either choose your first property you purchased, or you can choose your first development. So I'll let you decide which one you want to talk about.
Oh, look, the most interesting one would be the first development I did, for sure, by a long way. The first property I bought was my PPR, so just another property. Although I did build it as an owner builder, but. Yeah, no. The first development I did, well, I I had a bad car accident. Cut a long story short, but I had a bad car accident. Recovered. Took me a long time to recover. Went to the Gold Coast. I lived in Brisbane. I thought, oh well, you go to the Gold Coast to make your fortune, don't you? Not realising back in those days, you probably went to the Gold Coast to lose your fortune. But I wanted to get. I worked out while I was recuperating what I wanted to do, and I wanted to be a property developer. I looked at everything, share trading, all sorts of other things, but I was virtually broke by that point. I had to go back home, live with mum and dad. And it took me nearly 2 years to recover. So I headed off to the Gold Coast with a bit of money that I scunged off my. I didn't scunge; it was lent to me by my girlfriend's father at the time to pay a couple of weeks' rent in advance. But you couldn't just go straight into property development, and so I got a job at a real estate agency. And I thought, well, it's a foot in the market; it'll get me in the market. And so I started selling land subdivisions. But yeah, that's where I met a guy that ended up being my mentor. But it was my first project was a 4-lot subdivision, and it actually came through the office that I worked at. And so as a result, that fellow bought a block of land office, went away, got an approval for a 4-lot subdivision, and came back to sell it. And that was Tony. And so that was my first project. I actually took it on. Tony helped me out. So it was what we often call a vendor finance deal, that particular one. I had a little bit of money at the time, but not a lot. And
Wow.
So Tony, I didn't realise at the time, but he was quite a sophisticated property guy on the Gold Coast. But he took pity on me and heard my story about why I wanted to become a property developer. And what he did there, it was a vendor finance deal. So he took me to his bank, organised the finance. I can remember now, it was the NAB he banked with. He took me to his own bank, introduced me to his friendly bank manager who used to, remember bank managers used to actually make the decision on loans back in the 80s, and got me the finance. And I settled on the land. I gave him half the money for the land, half the price, and I did a loan for the other half. And the other half came out of the end when I sold the 4 lots. And so I was able to, the bank lent me 80% back in those days. I gave 50% to Tony. I had 30% left over. That helped me put the road in there, do the subdivision, sold them, paid the bank back first, paid Tony back second with some interest on the money that I owed him, the other half of the land I hadn't paid him for, and came out with a nice little earn. And the thing is, I didn't know how to do that. Tony showed me. Because normally if you're doing a vendor finance deal like that, as a developer, you're trying to talk the landowner into it. This is the case where the landowner, took me, who was, didn't even know what I didn't know. Took me in and helped me do that. And so that was my first project.
That's amazing. Why?
Yeah, it is.
Why did he do that?
Well, I did ask him, needless to say. And what he told me was, you see, when I met him, and I told him why I wanted to buy it, but I don't have enough money. That's probably one of the smartest things I ever said in my life, not really meaning it to be smart. And he said, why would you want to develop it? You're a land salesman. I said, yeah, but I'm only here as a stepping stone. I want to be a property developer. And he said, tell me more about that. And he sat down and we talked for probably half an hour. Wanted to know everything about me. And in the end, he said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, I can help you do that. And that's when he took me. But the reason, Joe, was that about 15 years prior to that, he said, what I saw in you who I was 15 years earlier. And, a young guy, full of enthusiasm, full of drive, dangerous, don't really know what you don't know. And he said, I just saw a reflection of myself. And he said, that's why he did it. But he said, weirdly, somebody had done the same thing for him those 15 years ago. It was a Jewish businessman who was involved in a lot of property in Melbourne, I think, where he originally came from, who had given him a leg up. And that particular Jewish gentleman had told Tony, he said, sometime you're going to have an opportunity to give someone else a leg up. Tony gave me a leg up. And that's how it all came about. And that kicked me off, really, because
that's a great story.
Well, I didn't put any money into my own. This is the whole thing. I suddenly realised I made probably, it would have been the equivalent these days of maybe you know, 2 or 3 houses, and
Wow.
probably two houses in profit. Didn't put 5 cents on the table, and so I was away, and I thought, yeah, I wonder how many of these I can do.
Yeah. Are these
second
type
one
of
was a bit different.
opportunities around today? Can we do this type of deal? Obviously, you need to find a very friendly gentleman to be able to do
or a
it
lady,
like
Joe.
that.
There's some person.
Ladies can invest as well.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Well,
Oh,
yeah.
Jesus, Joe.
I call that a vendor
course.
finance deal. It's one of different creative sorts of strategies. It's not my favorite one, but it's
No.
you know, it's there. Joint ventures with either investors or joint ventures with landowners are probably an easier thing to sell or to pitch to a landowner. And so I've done lots of those over the years, all sorts of those.
Yeah, that's a great. I think I mean I've sort of been amongst some property developing communities, and that sort of stuff can, although it sounds a bit sort of like your right place, right time, that sort of stuff can, if you put yourself in the right position and are actually just a person genuinely interested in learning about the process and can figure out what the other person may need. That sort of thing isn't too. It is possible that type of thing can still happen. That you can sort of have the right conversation and just connect with the person. So it's about the power of the conversation, I suppose. It's it's you just never know where it's going to take you.
No, and you know, it's probably one of the first people to actually teach a lot of those strategies, going back more than 20 years ago now. But I mean, still do them. I still do them. The students still do them. Joint venture with a so-called money partner or an equity partner is probably the most common one, where somebody has the money, the other one has the skills. You know, that makes a good joint venture. You don't want to be identical. I mean, that's not rocket science. Now everybody teaches that, but you know, that's a great opportunity for the person with the money that doesn't have the skills or knowledge, and it's a great opportunity for the person with the skills and knowledge that doesn't have the money. The two come together, do a deal, maybe halve the profit. It's great.
Yeah. How do you break up that split of expertise and revenue split or equity split of the deal? Like, do you have some frameworks for it?
Or there's 1,000 ways of cutting a deal. But I mean, there's two basic models for using investors' funds in a property development. There's what I call an equity partner, and they come in with the equity. And what I mean by the equity is when you go to finance a development, you're probably going to have to come up with about 25 or 30% of the dollar value of your costs. That's equity. That has to go on the table, and the bank will lend the other 75%, 70%. So we need an investor to give us that chunk of money, that equity. And then let's say the bank, it's probably a non-bank these days, the financier will lend us the rest of the money. So an equity partner is in there like boots and all. They're on the title, they're on the development loan. It's equity, it's not debt. You know, finance, really, we're always splitting debt from equity. What is it? Is it equity? Is it debt? This is equity. So they're in there, boots and all. They're on the title, they're on the loan. Obviously, the development type partner will be doing all the work, the project management. And if it's pretty straight up and down, they're both on the title, they're both on the loan, project manager, developer does that. It quite often is a 50-50 split at the other end on the profits. The second way you can use an investor is where they're not an equity partner. It's what I call a loan partner or a debt partner. So they're not on the title, they're not on the development loan. They simply lend funds via a loan, and obviously they have to grab some form of security. Often it's a second mortgage. Well, they get paid an interest rate. They don't get paid profit share because they're not in the deal. They're not part of the deal. They're not on the title. They're not on the development loan. And so basically they're the two types, if you like, of ways that you can use investors in property developments. But, you know, there's plenty of other ways. Obviously, you can step up into bigger projects. You start talking about syndicates and capital raisings and all that sort of thing. But then things can get pretty legal, so you've got to watch what you do up in that space.
Yeah, you need to sort of start to develop AFSLs potentially, depending on how big and who's involved. I do love that conversation. I love how Joe he wants to know how he can do it right. He wants to go out and do it tomorrow. He's sort of figuring out how. So I'm going to take a couple of steps back. So somebody just starting off as a property developer. Let's define, because I know this is probably a very straightforward question, but what do you consider as development, and what are the types of development? You could run us through a couple of those just briefly.
Yeah. Well, I don't. I'll tell you what I don't consider a property development is buying a block of land, building a house on it. That's just building a specky.
Okay.
I don't consider doing a reno property development. It's just doing a reno.
Yeah.
And the point of difference is this, is that, and some renos can be pretty big. They can be structural renos. You know, they're almost like in the world of property development. But you start off with one house on one lot, and you end up with one house on one lot. What I tend to consider property development is where you increase the yield. In other words, the simplest form would be one lot into a 2-lot subdivision. So you start off with one lot, you end up with 2. To me, that's property development. That's a very simple subdivision. Obviously, that's about the small. To me, that's a small development. That's just my definition, of course. Everybody's welcome to their opinion. But when you create more of something, to me, that's development, and then you can go up from there. So it could be a little subby.
What's your kind of mindset around property development? Like, how do you think about property development? Because I know a lot of property investors, when they're starting out, there is buy and hold, there is renovation, and then all the way over here is development. Like, there's a huge gap to bridge. Like, how do you mentally get your head around it, or how can you help someone that's new to it to try and get their head around it?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be such a big gap. I mean, if you think of like buying a block of land, building a house, it's not really in dollar value much different from splitting a block in two. So, but it is more complex because more than often you've got to get a building. It's not a building permit, a development permit. Unless that 2-lot subdivision is a splitter, where you don't need to get a development permit. Just about everything else you do. So if it's one lot into 2, it's not a splitter. You got to get a development permit. If it's a duplex, got to get a development permit. Is 3 townhouses, 4. So obviously a lot more complexity. If you buy a block of land, want to build a house, it's a quick building permit. A certifier could do it in a day. Here you go, certified, bang, approved. So we're moving into a world of property development where even the approvals are more complex. And so because of that, we've got to use more professionals, people like town planners, perhaps architects or building designers if we're going to do a building, surveyors. And as we move through in the building permit stage, we're talking about engineers, civil, structural, hydraulic engineers. These are people you don't need when you buy block land, build a house. So it's more complex. But obviously with that complexity comes the returns. In terms of your profits. So
maybe let's kind of unpack some of those professionals just so we can lay them out in a way that kind of makes sense for people. So you were talking about architects, town planners, accountants. Like, who are some of the professionals that you need to have on your team when you're doing, let's just say, a 1 into 4 subdivision and build?
You could start even before that and start thinking about, well, what structure am I going to use? And for that, you need a good accountant, somebody very familiar with property and ideally property development. I often call them a property accountant, but I suppose technically there's no such thing. But we know what we mean when we talk about that, and particularly somebody
know the difference.
Not the $79 tax return down at the Westfield Shopping Centre. That's not where you go for this. So get the structure right first of all, and that's not something you just grab off the shelf and it's the same for everybody. It depends on a number of things, but I mean the whole point of the correct structure is to minimise tax, which has got to be a good thing, and also asset protection. So having set that up, let's say, so what do you need? You need an accountant. You're going to need a lawyer. You're going to have to buy a property. You're going to have to sell them at the end. That could be a conveyancer, but it can get a bit more complex in property development where you need a property lawyer as opposed to just a conveyancer. But
that's actually a really good tip. Like, think about not just going to your local conveyancer, have actually a solicitor that does property law, and because that's something that I think would be easily overlooked. And I imagine some conveyancers would think that I should take this on. No, they can't.
Yeah, I have seen people get into trouble that way. Yeah, the great man said, "What is it? Price is what you pay, and value is what you get." Well, yep. That might be a good one for today, even though I stole it from somebody else.
It's the quote of the week.
Yeah, quote of the week.
Sorry, yeah. Go on with the professionals. Sorry, I cut you off there.
So we're going to do a little 1 into 4 lot subby. So the professionals are not too many because we're not building anything. So we're not building and building. As soon as you start to build a building, even if it was a duplex or townhouses, a lot more professionals are required. But something like a little subdivision, well, we need a surveyor for sure. We might need a town planner, although a good consulting surveyor often knows enough about town planning for something as simple as a subdivision. So you could have a surveyor and a town planner, or it might be just a really good consulting surveyor. And the other person's a civil engineer, because that's all around the services, you know. So when we're doing a subdivision, yeah, it has to be surveyed. Starts off at 1 lot, ends up in 2 lots. We're going to have a plan of subdivision. That's all the surveyor. We've got to get an approval. Well, it could be the consulting surveyor side of it, or it could be a town planner. Got to get our approval, and then we've got to get the services, the water, the stormwater, the sewage. That has to be dealt with. And that's
do we have to do that? Like, does all of that infrastructure have to be laid down and ready to go for when we sell it, or can we sell a site without the services on it to somebody?
Well, now we're back to talking whether we're talking about a splitter or a subdivision. If it was a, I'm not sure everybody's familiar with a splitter. You could have, let's say you've got 1 block of land you're going to cut into 2. If it's a splitter, what we often call a splitter, it's 2 lots on 1 title, for those that don't know. So you don't have to really subdivide. It's already 2 lots, but you do have to split the title. So that's a much easier process. Generally doesn't require a development permit. You don't get charged contributions. It's pretty quick. I've seen them go through in 3 or 4 days on the rare occasion.
Those ones are quite tough to find these days, because they're sort of like the golden.
You can find them, they just can't make any money out of them.
Profitable, yeah. Usually.
But a 2 lot subdivision is one lot, 1 title. So we've got to split the lot into 2. We've got to split the title, obviously. So a little bit more.
I'll just share my screen real quick and show the people what we mean. They're very common in Queensland. Would you say that Queensland's where they are the most?
Yeah, certainly, Brisbane's littered with them.
Littered with them. This is where this is legally already split up into 2, but the house is on the front. Do you know the history of why this exists, Bob?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
What is it? Why do they exist?
Well, but many years ago, probably in a place like Brisbane, I'm probably going back the 1840s, 50s, 60s, as they started to, expand out of I'll call it the CBD. Wouldn't have been much of a CBD in 1850, but a few pubs, a few brothels, some butchers, or God knows what you got there.
Churches.
And a few churches.
Yeah.
Just to balance things out a bit.
Yeah, exactly. Balance out the sin.
Yeah. So nearly all the lots were cut into what they call 16 perches, which we commonly call a 405 square metre lot now. But so they're all 16 perches, but a lot of people bought 2 lots. I imagine they're pretty cheap. And they built a house on that. So they bought 2 405 square metre lots, and they built their house across it. And that was called 32 perches, 809 square metres. They're everywhere. And over the years, some of them did amalgamate back into 1 lot, but others kept them as 2 lots. But you could get reduced rates from the council if you had a split. It might be 2 lots on 1 title, but it wasn't rated as 2 separate lots because you only had 1 house on it. So as a result, as I said, Brisbane is littered with splitters where they were the old 216s or the 2 405s, 1 house on them. But you're right. I mean, they've been picked over pretty heavily, and it's hard to get a splitter to make enough money, for sure.
Yeah. And there are ways on a splitter block where if the house is on stilts and easy to move, you can relocate that house rather than demolishing it and having to build 2 new houses. You can move this house, pop it on the left side block and keep the right side block and put a new house up. You can do that in a lot of cases. There's always, within the zones, you get overlays that might say, well, you can't demolish the house in any event. There's certain parts of, you mentioned Brisbane, there's certain parts of Brisbane where if a house was built before December 1946, you can't demolish it.
Heritage probably reasons, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, it's got to do with the age and character of housing, you know. So there's, but yeah, so lots of splitters. You're right. Probably go back 30 years. It would have been good to pick the eyes out of all the splitters, but they've pretty well been picked over. Some people do buy them, even though they don't make much money on the split. They build a house on each one, and they actually end up making money from doing like 2 spec houses, basically. You know, they mightn't make a lot out of the land, but they're often in really good positions. If you choose the right suburb, and get a splitter, and you know, you might make a lot out of the subdivision part of it, but by building the house, you know, you might get enough margin out of that if you choose the right areas,
and potentially increasing the cash flow potentially, depending on how much you pay, of course.
Yeah. Like in a place like Brisbane, there's sort of a sweet spot probably in that $1.5 to $2 million end value house. When you go into the lower valued suburbs, it doesn't work. But yeah, so some people do that. Some people do a splitter where they make almost no money out of the split, but they might put a rooming house on each of the 2 lots and end up with 2 5-bedroom rooming houses that produce a cash flow that makes the whole thing worthwhile. Whereas it
Bob,
didn't as a subdivision.
You've bumped your camera off. We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Is that the technical term?
I'll have to call out to... how do I get that?
That's all right. We'll keep talking anyway. But
hang on,
or maybe just we'll
I think
keep asking questions.
Hillary's
there's a button there that says "Stop Cam" down the bottom. Just hit that.
Yeah, there it is.
Hit that.
It's popped up finally.
There you
There
go.
Well done.
Here we go.
The extender arm. Thank
That's
you,
my
Hillary.
deadbeat partner. No, not really.
We are.
You're the deadbeat.
Grab the deadbeat
partner, Rob.
Have to be careful.
Hey,
in case somebody's
one
started
question
late.
actually. One question I did have is because Hillary is the beating heart of the business, and Hillary, you're into mindset a lot. How important is mindset in property development? Now, maybe I'm sorry.
Hillary, you're asking Bob what Hillary thinks.
Well, I'm asking both. Well, I'm asking Bob, and I imagine Hillary wants to jump in right now. But Hillary, you can feel free to jump in.
Put her on the spot here, Joe.
Hillary's upstairs. I don't know if she's watching.
Oh, is she? Sorry. Okay. No, but how important
I'll answer
is
on her
mindset?
behalf.
Yeah.
It's a big. I mean, hang on. Speak of the.
She's not dressed for it.
Oh, she's not dressed for it, but
Okay,
that's okay.
No.
She's educated me enough that I'll answer on her behalf if it's okay.
Yeah, because I think it's so crucially important, and it's such an overlooked topic. But how important is mindset?
Well, I mean, it's important to be successful in anything, even not outside of property development. But you know, where I noticed it is, like I obviously have property development courses, and so thousands of people have done my course, and every so often you bump into them, and sometimes you bump into them, you know, at different events and and the like, and it's like, what are you doing? Oh, didn't really work for me. Oh, why is that? Oh, you know, I couldn't find the time, or my job was too demanding, or you know, I got a wife and 3 kids, or 100 other reasons, and that's just one example. But what I came to realize pretty quickly is, 3,000 people got the same course, and some are out there like making millions and millions of dollars. Some are absolutely doing nothing. Some people are kicking around a bit and doing a bit. You know what I mean? Like, and so what's the difference? They all got the same course. They must have been enthusiastic in the beginning because they paid the money to do it. Like they paid the money to buy the course. They must have had a reason. And a certain level of drive to want to do it, but they didn't. And so the difference isn't the education or the course. The difference is the human being that bought it. And so, I mean, and you can transpose that anywhere, into property investment, into anything or other businesses way beyond property. And that's the difference. And but some people need help. You can't always sort that out yourself. And that's a lot of what Hillary does in the business. I mean, she does lots of stuff, but I mean, she's trained. She studied psychology. She studied under David Rock and Dr. David Rock, whatever it is. So that's a strength of hers. And I put that to good use within our business, of course, to get people, up and going.
Yeah, and what are some of the common traits that you see of the most successful property investors? Like, what is it that stands out, the top 10% or top 5% that you don't see, that you can't? Like, is there something you consistently see, or is it maybe not that easy?
Yeah, I'll pick a word: determination. And what I mean by that is, obviously, you have to have goals. You have to set goals. You have to have something to shoot for, and it has to be attainable, and it can be, ratcheted up. But the bottom line is determination. In other words, when things go wrong, they don't cry about their skint knee. They're just determined, like at all costs, they will succeed. It is determination. It's life. Hey, you're gonna, as I say, they're gonna have speed bumps. You're gonna hit detours. Projects, if anything, tend to go longer than what you think. Everybody puts at the beginning of a development project, say, okay, this is a 15-month project. Now, more often than not, it's going to be like 18 or 19 or 20 even, things tend to go slower than fast. You can say, oh, hang on, signs come through. Self-belief. All right, Hillary's given me a thing here called self-belief. I just saw a sign come through the door. And believing you can do it. Well, I know she does spend time with a lot of people, actually convincing them that they can do it.
Yeah.
And that's confidence invaluable.
I'm gonna rein us back in, but first, before I do that, I'm gonna dive a bit further down the rabbit hole. I found, because I've often struggled with committing to these, to just not anything, but some things. And what I found is it's about how good you are, and this just works for me, so I'm not saying it necessarily works for anybody, how good you are at negotiating in other aspects of your life and figuring out, well, okay, I've got to take the dog for a walk. I've got to do the job. I've got to take the kids to soccer training. I've got to do X, Y, and Z. I've got to sleep 8 hours a day. It's which one of those trade-offs are you willing to take? And if you're not willing to cut out the Friday night sort of pub sessions, go and watching the footy or whatever it is, then that's often where I find a lot of people probably struggle, because the intention is there, but it's the lack of kind of committing a time and effort and energy. But that's what
goes back to my quote. Every problem has a solution, it just has a price attached, right? Yep. What are you willing to give up for what you want to achieve?
Yeah. And that's what happens, because they fail to prioritize that, and it sort of slips down the rung. Maybe take
it's kind of like when I thought I could be a successful forex foreign exchange trader, and I was sold the dream that you can do this in 20 minutes a day, and you get all pumped up, you go to the course, and the next minute you actually realize you're like, oh crap, this is actually really hard. Like these people have been doing this for 20 or 30 years, and I can't. I need to, like, I can probably do it in 20 minutes a day once you've got the process, but learning the process can take 1 to 2, however long it takes, but. Yeah,
specific type of brain for those type of things.
You could be a forex drinker in 20 minutes a day, no worries at all. I know that.
Yeah,
just not a successful one. One thing that I wanted to ask, Bob, is because you've seen a number of cycles. You've gone through. This is like what's happening right now for you is probably just another one of those, because I've been through it so many times. How are you seeing this current market cycle? And what are your kind of thoughts on what's happening at the moment? And what kind of advice have you got for people that are a little bit scared at the moment? And where do you see it headed in the future? A lot of questions, but
yeah, there's a bit there. All right. You're right. Like in 40 years of development, I've seen a lot, the 87 stock market crash when the world was going to end, and the .com crash, the Asian meltdown, GFC. I've developed when, interest rates were around, one of my projects, I paid 23% for interest. So I've developed through high interest rates when unemployment was about 11.4%, so inflation, 12%. So I've developed through a lot of those things, and it's not where everything's bad at the same time. So at the moment, I mean, what do we got? Employment, like unemployment's like 3 point something percent.
Lowest it's been.
I've never seen that. You know, we were told in the GFC it's going to hit 12 or 15 or something. It was down to about 3 point something. And you know, I've developed when it's been like 12%. Interest rates, people are, I mean, some of the younger people, of course, haven't seen interest rates like we're seeing at the moment. You know, they might have been coming out of school, sort of in the early 20s or whatever. You know, they're just used to something with a 2 or a 3 in front of it. But really, that's not normal, and that's not reality. And it'll get back. It'll find a level. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think the standard variable rate's probably going to finish somewhere around 5 to 5.25. And that's still like the 30-year average.
The loan, not from the RBA.
Not
like,
from the RBA. No, not talking about the cash rate. Yeah, not the cash rate. I mean, the cash rate's fine, but most people, I mean, you know, it's a standard variable rate that most people, you know, that you know, has an effect on you, I guess. But like, what do we got? We got, you know,
2.35 at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. And look,
cash rate. So, yeah.
I mean, the cash rate, I think could peak somewhere around 3.6 to 3.8 or something like that eventually, you know. But the thing that's different now that I haven't seen before in the 40 years, I've seen you know, interest rates 4 or 5 times that high. I've seen unemployment, you know, everything I've seen. I've never seen such a rapid increase in construction costs as we've seen in the last 2 years. I've obviously lived through times of construction cost increases, but never so much so fast. And so that's been something new for me. I was telling somebody the other day, back in 1990, I had a look at an old project I did. I was building 2-story, 3-bedroom townhouses for $45,000, and I was buying townhouse sites 8 kilometres from the CBD at $7,000 a site. Now that sounds ridiculous, but at the time that was normal. And so, you know, you just get used to the current norm, don't you? But yeah, so build costs are the big thing at the moment. And we all know what they've done. They rocketed off, and we pretty much know the reasons why they did it. And that's a worldwide thing. That wasn't restricted to Australia at all. It was a worldwide phenomenon after COVID. Now, for a little while in like 2021, it didn't really matter because sale prices or you know, house values were going up so much, it actually outstripped the build cost. And so, you know, you're actually making, even though build costs were going boom, you know, property values are going right up there at you know, at a far greater rate. But then, of course, you know, this year we've seen property values level out, in some cases, you know, trickle backwards a little bit. But build costs have still been going up, but nowhere near the rate that they went up in 21. It has slowed down a lot. Supply chains are loosened up a lot. You know, the cost of a container went up 300%. It's come back a reasonable amount. You know, so the supplies aren't as bad. There's still a bit of a pressure on trades. And also floods.
It's also the fact that the builders need to factor in a larger margin just in case now. Whereas pre, you know, 20,
well, they've got to make money, Joe.
But they have to also factor in, if prices continue to grow, they have to build a bit more of a margin in. So if you are you seeing that, Bob? Like out there in the market, people are putting an extra bit of the extra bit on top just in case they get hit with another, you know, crazy supply chain issue and their own prices go up. Or what are you seeing out there with builders?
Well, a lot of suppliers keep pretty close to builders. So a lot of builders know when things are likely to go up. But what you've got, they will build, if it's a lump sum fixed price contract, they're obviously got to have a bit of fat in there. But what we saw probably in the last 6 or 9 months with builders is having rise and fall or escalation clauses in contracts to take care of that side of it. For them, it's not something banks love. They love the certainty of a, you know, fixed price contract, not something with an escalation clause. But there's a lot of ways you can negotiate with the builder on even something like an escalation clause. I mean, you could cap it. You could cap it at 3%, or you could have it that it only relates to certain things like steel and concrete, or or you could share it. You know, you could share the rise. You know, like there's probably at least 7. I think I did a podcast a little while ago. It's about 7 things you can do to work with a builder on a contract that even has rise and fall clauses in it to try and you know, get even ground, try and make it fair. But that's, I mean, that's, you know, you asked me what I've seen or what's different. That's certainly different. and in some cases, some people have had to, put their projects on ice a bit if they're quite marginal, and they're in an area where prices have pegged back a little bit, and now that margin's not quite there. I've also seen people go ahead on developments where the margin is now a bit skinny. And what I mean by the margin, for those that don't know, that's your profit margin. Okay, it's a percentage of your cost. But what they're saying is they're looking ahead, and they're saying, okay, interest rates will settle down. They're not going to be 10% or something like that. Most people are saying, well, the standard variable's probably going to finish at 5 to 5.5, and you'll just get used to it again. And what's happened is in the development world, particularly in like smaller developments, not so much big ones, is that a lot of people that are very much part-time developers, I'll call them part-timers, they're there for the good times and they run away when things look a little bit like it might be getting a bit hot. And so they're not in there all the time like us developers. And between a lot of other things like overseas migrations now going to be cranked up again, and they're seeing a hole in the market for product in probably 12 months to 2 years, because there's a lot of people that got development permits that aren't real developers, and they're not going ahead because they watch the news or they listen to all the wrong people. And we did an analysis where pretty close to us because we're involved in a number of upmarket duplexes. And we had a look at all the duplex sites that have sold in these particular 3 suburbs for the last 2 years. We've had a look at how many of those have gone on and got a development permit. We looked at how many of those have gone on and got a building permit, and how many of those have gone on and been built and then been sold. And the HIA did something recently, the same sort of thing. The number of developments that have got building permits but haven't proceeded further. And it's quite a high percentage. And so in this particular area that we looked at, I was extremely surprised because looking at that, we can project what's going to come on the market in the next 1 to 2 years. And so we're full steam ahead, because what it looks like is there's going to be a lot less stock on the market because a lot of things aren't going ahead. And they're not going ahead because people spook. I've developed continually for 40 years through all sorts of markets, and I just laugh at the current market. But
there's a quote out there that says never waste a good crisis. So not that I think interest rates rising is a crisis, but if you jump onto your smartphone and look at news.com or any of those kind of websites, you think it is the world is absolutely going to end tomorrow. Because so you sort of it's amazing. You have that mindset of kind of looking and sort of seeing where there's a bit of a niche, a bit of an opportunity. So
and some people are even going ahead now with margins that are a little bit skinnier in the expectation that when they get there, and of course there's an element of risk in that, but there's going to be a lot less stock on the market, and in a lot of places, finished completed stock is getting a bit of a premium, where selling off the plan's probably gotten a bit harder.
Yeah, I've seen a number of sites that are selling off the plan, and they just sit there and just don't go anywhere. They were trying to sell it they sold a development, they got a DA on the property. Now they're just selling it with the DA because they're scared and they couldn't sell it off the plan. When you talk about development margins, what's like the standard? I always hear this whole 20% rule. How do you look at those type of numbers, and how do you think about the numbers for a development?
Yeah, the old 20% was around when I started 40 years ago, I think. But so what we're talking about, for those that don't understand, it's called the developer's margin, return on cost, margin on cost. And what it is, it's your profit expressed as a percentage of your total costs. So, if your total costs for $1 million and your profit from that project was $200,000, 200,000 as a percentage of a million is 20%. That's what for those that aren't familiar with it, that's what it is. And you're right, the 20% thing's been there forever, but the reality is that it varies for different types of projects. And if a project is small, it's quick, and therefore it's probably safe, the margin doesn't have to be the same. So I'll take a benchmark and I'll say, let's say you're doing 4 townhouses project. Well, somewhere around 18 to 20% sort of normal. And if you go above 20, well, that's good. It gets even better. But, financials will probably finance anything from around 17 to 20%, but we like to shoot for 20. But when you come down to something like a duplex, that often drops down to about 16%. And the reason for that is it's considered to be less risky, let's say, and can be a lot quicker. And of course, getting approvals can be quicker depending on where you are. There's nothing fast in Victoria, sorry, about getting approvals. But like locally where we live, we're involved in a number of them, and we can get an approval out in 4 to 5 weeks for a good duplex, Wow. And there's some types of projects that do fast track through council. So something like that, yeah, probably about that 15%, 16%. If you were to do a 2-lot subdivision and build 2 houses, let's say, and you can build the 2 at the same time or 1 at a time, just depending on your cash flow. 16% is fine for that sort of thing. 15% even. 15 is fine because it's a lower risk thing. When you step up, let's say you're doing apartments, and particularly if you're doing a large apartment project, you can't build it in stages. Like if you're doing 50 apartments in an apartment, a building, you can't build 10 now and sell them, and then we'll go and build another 10 and sell them, and then but you could do that if it was a 50-lot subdivision. You just do 5 stages of 10. If it was 50 townhouses, you do 5 stages of 10. But you're doing 50 apartments, you got to build the whole lot, and you spend every cent before you ever get $1 back at settlement. So those margins are 25% or more.
What I'm hearing there is potentially more risk in developing apartments, or would you? And that's subsequently you want to see a higher return on capital or potential return on capital.
Yeah, there's risk, but not so much from the product. The product might be in strong demand, but it's the fact that, I use the example of 50. You have to build the whole 50 and fully expend all that money before you ever see $1 come back.
Yeah.
Whereas a 50-lot subdivision,
not too efficient at that point in time.
No,
can't do anything with it. All of it, all in that block. Never thought of it that way.
When you can stage something and you can stage something if it's horizontal, land subdivision, townhouses, retirement village. I'm doing a retirement village at the moment. It's 99 houses, but it's done in 5 stages. You could say 20. Doesn't work out quite 20, but it's you could say 20 a stage. So what that means, okay, I go in there, I build 20, and we're selling them. And then when I'm into stage 2, I'm already getting profits out of stage 1. And when I'm into stage 3, I've got the profits out of stage 1 done and dusted, and I'll probably settle on half of them in stage 2. So that keeps your peak debt down. Like if I was building 99 apartments, I'd just have to go in and build the whole 99 before I saw $1.
Yeah, you'd have a great payday, but you would need a lot more cash.
A lot more equity, probably a lot of pre-sales. If some financier says, we want 30% pre-sales, well, 30% of 100 is 30. But if it was at 10 stage, it's only 3. And particularly sometimes in the market, of course, it's harder to get pre-sales than others. And now because there's a lot less, there's less buyers out there fighting over each other. They might be prepared to wait until the product's finished rather than buy off plan,
Yeah. What I'd like to do is kind of dig into this 9-step process. But I had a friend reach out to me specifically to ask you a question around what do you value more in terms of like return metrics? Do you value the ROI, the cash on cash return? Like what's your main focus when you're looking at a deal?
Why aren't they watching the live, Joe? They should be asking the question. Get them on the live. Get them watching.
Oh, yeah.
Jeez.
Tuck it in here. Throw in your question. It's already set up.
The
point.
The margin on cost, the return on cost we just spoke about is important because it's what a finance is going to look at on a project where you're using commercial finance. If you're doing a little a duplex and you're using normal retail finance, they don't really look at the margin. But as soon as you move into like 3 or more, what we call commercial finance, margin's very important. If it's a 4-pack, it needs to be 17 to 20. If it's a duplex, probably 15, like we just talked about. So that's important. So obviously I'll look at that because if it doesn't show enough, I'm not going to get the finance. Like some people, I've seen a lot of people say they might be looking at a project and say the minimum was 18%. We need to get 18%. It's showing 13. And they say, well, look, I don't care because 13% is still like 240,000. And I'll be happy with that.
How much risk are you taking to achieve that 13% though? That's the
But the point is they can't finance it, so they never get to make their mind up unless they're using cash and not going to the bank at all. The bank, well, I say the bank, the financier, I said no, the margin's too skinny. So it doesn't matter if you're happy with that amount of money, and you're not going to get it financed, so it's irrelevant, But back to Joe's question. I mean, margin I do look at because I want to make sure I can get this thing financed.
Yeah, great point.
Return on capital. Well, internal rate of return is something we often use in development, which actually it's your profit, but it takes into account time. So if you're going to make $100,000 out of a project and it takes a year, and you've got another project where you can make $100,000 and it takes 2 years, you'll probably go for the one that takes 1 year. So time is relevant, is what I'm saying. So, and some good feasibility programs will work out the internal rate of return for you. It's a return on your capital, but you can change that drastically by putting in less equity and taking on more debt. Yeah. So if we're talking about ROI in property development, we're talking about the amount of equity or cash or whatever we have to put into a deal to get it financed versus the profit. And like if we put $500,000 equity in, we got $500,000 profit. The cash on cash return is 100%. But the point is, did that take 1 year, 2 years, or 10 years? That would affect the time value of money, being the internal rate of return. So time is important.
Time is.
But if you gear up, if the bank says you put in 30% and we'll lend you the other 70, and you have a look at it, okay, I get sort of X% return on my cash, on my capital. But then if you could, let's say you used another type of finance, maybe mezzanine finance, where you ended up, the mezzanine put in another 20 and you put in 10. So it could be 10% equity from you, 20% mezzanine finance from the mezzanine lender, and 70% from the financier. All of a sudden,
Joe's getting a bit confused. So when we talk, we're talking about the capital stack here, Bob. So you got the mezzanine would be considered what, the third type of what do you consider the mezz finance?
Well, it's another level of finance at a higher interest rate because there's a higher level of risk. But I guess to keep it simple for people, if you put in 30%, you get a certain return on your capital. But if you could get by somehow and only put in 10%, then the return on that would be a lot higher. Even if your interest was higher, it'd still be a lot higher, because it's the same profit or a little bit less on a third of the money, on a lot less money. So you often see big developers, they'll mezzanine. There is a level of risk. I mean, the higher the debt, the higher the level of risk. So, but then the higher the return on your capital. Yeah. And it might mean in some cases a developer could do a second project
at the same time.
Yeah, like if you got $1 million to do one project, but you could work your finance that you could do it on 500, then you could do two. So
that's a great point about. That's a great point about the time value of money, because you hear about that 20% rule, but for example, we just went unconditional on a 1 into 2 subdivision. Keep the front house, subdivide, split off the back block. And then we're either going to sell or they're going to build and all of that stuff. But basing it on what do we get? The return, the developer margin that we had, it's 15.55. But the time frame to do that is 9 months. So yes, it's only 15%, but the time is only 9 months. So if you drag that out and make it that internal rate of return that Bob was talking about, it would be better than 20%. Well, maybe not better, but it would be around that 20% margin for the year. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Bob. Yeah. What I wanted to do was jump into our 9-step process for development and explore exactly what that means and how people can do it. And Jeff, have you got something to say?
I've written some questions because I think we've catered to the advanced, sort of the more intermediate developers has gotten a heap of. I think if somebody's just starting, they've heard a lot of terms thrown at them and like, okay, I don't actually know how to do. How do I sort of strip it back? So I think we've covered some of the 9-step process, but I think I broke it into segments when I was looking at it myself. So a couple of steps are finding the site, due diligence, and financial feaso. So what do you typically, when you're first off finding a site, what do you look at? And I suppose it depends on what you're looking to do. But
yeah, it's good to know what you're going to look for. Like you might say, okay, I want to do a 2-lot subdivision. Well, that's good. At least now we know what you've got to look for, you know.
Yep.
Or I want to do duplex, or I want to do 3 townhouses. So I think the first thing to do is understand what it is you're looking for.
Yep.
And you might be happy with any of those things, you know. But I think it's always better if you target it. And so I'm just looking at 2 steps before you actually go looking. One is to work out what you can afford. I mean, if you can afford to do a duplex, don't go looking for 6-packs. So work out what you can afford, and that might mean a conversation with a good finance broker who can have a look at your financial situation, your assets, what you earn, and so forth, and say, okay, this is the sort of thing you could afford to do. So, okay, now I know I can afford it. If you can't afford it, then you're going to have to think about an investor. But so, okay, and now what am I going to do? So it might be that you could afford to do a duplex. Okay, well, let's go and look for a site for a duplex, or whatever it happens to be. Now we go looking. And so how do you do that? Well, I mean, to keep it simple, you can either look yourself or someone can look for you. So I'm talking about a buyer's agent or a buyer's advocate who had some experience in development sites, you know, not necessarily one that just finds houses for people or investment properties, but someone who's got a bit of experience in that area. And so you could look at that. Or you could look yourself, or you could do both if you wanted to. But at least how you're going to look. Now, if you're going to go looking yourself, it's good if you narrow an area down. I call that selecting your patch. So you might say, okay, there's an area over here. It mightn't be far from where you live. That'd be handy. You know, another suburb or 2 could even be where you live. Okay, it's got the right zoning, which means I can do a townhouse there, and you choose a patch. The reason you don't choose a whole city is, as we know, even from property investment or anything, there's so many markets within a capital city. You know, like massive city like Sydney, there could be 30 markets. Who knows? I've got no idea. But just geographically and from price point of view, there's so many different markets. You can't be an expert in all of those markets. You can be an expert in 1 or 2, and that's what you need to do. You need to be what I call the local expert. So having worked out what we can afford, having worked out what we want to do, we choose our area and we start to dig deep. So one of the first things I'd do is I'd have a look in that area and I'd work out who are the agents who could help me find a site. And they're probably the same agents that sell new projects, because often agents that sell projects sell sites because that's how they get the projects to sell. So it makes sense. And so even from the comfort of your armchair, you could hop on Domain or realestate.com. You could bring up the suburb that you're interested in. You could put in, let's say, townhouses or whatever it is you're looking for. And you can put a price range in, which might knock some of the cheaper old secondhand product out. And all of a sudden, you'd start to see, let's say, some new townhouse projects that are for sale. And then you can see who those agents are, because they quite often that agent exclusively sells new projects. You know, and there's probably other people in the office that sell, maybe someone does apartments, someone does secondhand property, you know, and they're the people you need to talk to. And you also, when they have if they've got any opens, you know, open for inspections on whenever, you should go there and have a look at what other developers are building and talk to the agents and get to know them. So I've chosen my patch. Now I'm looking, and there might only be 3 or 4 agents in my patch that I really want to talk to. And they're the ones that sell new projects. I'll be talking to them about sites, about projects, about values, you know, and really get to know them. Or if I was using a buyer's agent or buyer's advocate, I'd need to brief them on exactly what I wanted and where I wanted it. But then they might head out and use all their contacts to try and find something.
With that speaking to agents, Bob, because if I'm sort of haven't done my first development or just done 1 or 2, is there a way you can sort of demonstrate that you're not, I suppose, a time waster? Is there a way you've been able to do that?
Well, it's always a concern of an agent, the old tire kickers. But I mean, I think once they understand that you know what you're talking about, I think you start to get their respect. I was talking to one of our students a little while ago. He moved into a patch, and for a while, the agents sort of ignored him a bit. But as they spoke more, and a couple of them had put up a deal, he'd do a feasibility. It wouldn't work. He'd go back to the agent and say, "Look, I really appreciate you giving me this, but the problem is I can't make any money out of it. But hey, the next one might work." And then all of a sudden, he started to get some respect. And then before long, he said, "Now they're phoning me," and that's what you want. So they came to realization. He excuse the expressions, tie kicker, but he wasn't one. He knew what he was talking about. He was genuine, and and well mannered, and thanking them for their for what they're doing.
You've got to know how to communicate correctly to talk about what you're going to talk about. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and so that's with that little group of agents. Now you got to stay in contact with them.
Well,
you get forgotten quickly.
You get forgotten very quickly. Or they think you've found a site and moved on. What I wanted to ask is, out of all the states in Australia, there's so many states in Australia. Do you find that some states are more developer friendly, or it's easier to develop in certain states than other states?
Victoria.
Not Victoria. So we already know the answer to that first bit.
Well, yeah, it's not just states; it can be councils. I mean, Victoria does have a little bit of a reputation whereby a number of the councils, I'm not going to say all of them because it wouldn't be all of them, but I think, in my opinion, too many councils in Victoria take too much notice of objectors. And I'm talking about frivolous objectors. So when somebody's got a development permit and they've lodged it, and it comes up for public notification where people can comment on it, a lot of the comment from people is what I call frivolous. Like, there's too many cars on the street. This thing should have a garage for 3 cars. Well, that's fine, but the planning scheme says you only need 2. But they don't know or care about the planning scheme. So you do get a lot of frivolous responses from people, and in my opinion, a number of the councils in Victoria take too much notice of those people. Whereas I'm thinking of other councils in other places where if that person doesn't have a town planning ground for that objection, then it really shouldn't hold any water. Like some people say, "Oh, when I moved here, there was no townhouses, and now I've got one on the other side. Now I've got 4 families living there, and now this one on the other side of me. I didn't come here to live between 8 families." Well, yeah, maybe, but the land's zoned for that. And I can tell you what, when that person eventually sells, they'll be looking for a developer. So back to the question, yeah, it can happen a bit in Victoria, a bit like that. And some of the development permits can take a bit longer. Well, that's just like...
Well, yeah, and also some states' rules are much easier to understand. Like South Australia, they have a governing... They look after the developments. Obviously, there are councils as well that you have to go through for the development applications. But like in New South Wales, it's so much more harder because you've got the local environment plan, you've got the overlay, that's it, SCP, the LEP. Is there states that are easier to get into developing? What states are easiest to get into developing?
Well, you mentioned South Australia. Also council. Queensland. Well, I live in Queensland. It's not a secret. But I've met councils here who had for some reason, a lot of green. And I'm not against green at all, but a lot of green councillors came into a particular council at one election, and they were like almost violently anti-business, anti-development, anti-everything, and everything just shut down. And that was a council, I know it's a bit of a weird thing, but look, it can even come down to the person at the council. I've had differing opinions within the same council between 2 of their town planners about something, and some of it's how they interpret things, because not everything's absolutely black and white, and some people might just have a bit of a bug about something,
Might have a bad day.
South Australia, Queensland. At the end of the day, you got a professional called a town planner, and the town planner is very familiar with the requirements of the planning scheme. They're all over it. If they're familiar with that particular council, that's the one I'd engage. And yeah, look, you get there. I mean, there's always, if you get knocked back, you can always go to court. The retirement village I'm doing, I had to go to court to get the approval. I was fully within my rights. They should have approved it, but they didn't. And I ended up in the Land Environment Court. I spent $1 million to win it. But, you know, sometimes that's what you got to do. And
you got to figure out which things you got to object to.
They were wrong in every respect. They had 30 reasons, and every one of them eventually got thrown out of court. But, you know, that's councils. They wield a lot of power.
They do, yeah. Well, that's I mean, we've covered a lot of, or some of the 9-step sort of process throughout our conversation. But the one that I'm sort of probably jump in if you want, Joe, but the finance piece and just the feasibility as well. What's typically how much what do you suggest apart from things like I mean, you got your basic sort of stuff like what you can buy for, what your build costs are, and sales price. Is there anything else that you typically would include, your soft and hard costs and that sort of stuff? What stuff do you?
Yeah. Well, the soft and hard cost sort of thing is more for what we call retail finance. So small projects, you can, to a degree, use what we call retail finance. So that's your normal banks that you see around the place. Once you step up a little bit, the banks have a commercial arm. You go there, you go to a non-bank, but with finance, I've just lost my train of thought. What were you saying about the finance? Sorry.
Like what types of things would you include in the feaso? Like I know there's things like you definitely want to include things like sort of GST, of course, and your margin scheme, but they're the really obvious ones. Are there anything that isn't obvious that we?
Well, I've got it within our program. We've actually built our own feasibility program, which is an absolute ripper. But just generally, if you're doing, say, a back of envelope type of feasibility, I've got what I call a 5-minute feasibility. So obviously, the quicker the feasibility, the less accurate it might be. But I start off with the big number, and that's the selling price. So we start there. But in terms of the costs, I've got sort of 6 standard costs. Construction, even if it's subdivision, there is a construction cost involved, but obviously if there's a building, it's quite significant. Construction, council fees, they're not insignificant, particularly in some states like, you know, Queensland. Contributions can be quite high. So construction, council, consultants. So they're the different professional people that you use. Finance, which is an obvious one. Marketing, GST you can't avoid. And there's just lots of other little things I call miscellaneous. What I've found over the years, and obviously in 40 years, I've met a lot of people, and people that tend to get, I've met who've been in trouble, shall we say, with the development. I always like to try and work out, well, where did it go wrong? And I'd say probably 80 or 85% of the time, they got their numbers wrong. They got their feasibility wrong. They didn't. They left a lot of things out that they didn't know, or they had wrong values. And like in property development, it's all about the numbers. At the end of the day, it's quite unemotional. It's just a matter of getting the numbers right. And you know that old saying, the numbers don't lie. Well, but you've got to get the numbers right, obviously. And
the spreadsheet might lie if you enter in the wrong numbers.
Yeah.
I bet you see that. I bet you see that a whole heap when someone enters in. You know what? I could probably sell it for 1.2. Well, nothing else sold for 1.2. It's only gone for $1 million. There's $200,000 right there.
That's when emotion comes into it. Like doing a feasibility with numbers, there should be no emotion around numbers. And you just said there, because some people try and make a deal work. They might have looked for a deal for quite a while and got frustrated. Eventually, they find one, so they don't want to listen to the fact that it doesn't stack up. Right? They found this one they think works, and so emotion can creep in. Just like you said, they put the selling price in and it doesn't quite work, and they think, well, hang on, the market's going up, or I'm going to build something really good and I'll sell it for more than everyone else is selling it for. So they put the sale price up, and then it's still not quite there. And they think, well, there's another big number. It's the build cost. I'm going to go. I'm going to talk to a lot of builders, and I'm going to, really negotiate hard with them. And so I reckon I can build it cheaper. And so, you up the sale price, you drop the construction price, and all of a sudden, oh, look, it works.
This is perfect.
But that's emotion. You're trying to force something to work because you've got an emotional attachment to it. You don't want it to fail. You don't have to go back out there and look for another deal, and you can't do that.
Yeah, it's just you
Turn
bumped
off the
it
camera
off.
again.
I'll be back.
We've got a good chance here. So what we'll do is we'll just jump into our next ad. And then what I wanted to jump into was some of the questions. So if anyone has any questions for Bob, Bob is one of the leading experts in property development. So if you get any questions, now is a great opportunity to get it answered. Yeah. And we'll jump into this.
The amazing thing with commercial property investing is that in most cases, it's cash flow positive from day one, which means that you can drive those profits towards paying down the debt. There are instances with commercial property investing where you can actually have the property pay itself off over 10 years, which is absolutely crazy. With commercial property, you get massive net yield, so you can expect anywhere between 6 to 10%. And as we've seen in the current boom, these properties not only provide large cash flow, they do certainly grow wildly in value too. Now, with big rewards comes some risk, and this is why you should de-risk your investment as much as possible. And the way you do that is with expert due diligence. And this is why we highly recommend people hire professionals to help you along in your investing journey. Steve Polisi of Polisi Property is one such expert. Being a chartered mechanical and structural engineer in a past life, Steve draws on his analytical and mathematical skills to do that expert due diligence for you. With 6 years experience in the space, Steve has over 1,200 property transactions under his belt. He's the guy you want in your corner, crunching the numbers and finding the best properties in the best locations, along with ensuring that you avoid the mistakes. Steve has actually even written the book on commercial property investing in Australia. And not only is it a bestseller, I believe it to be the most comprehensive in commercial property investing on the market today. He's been generous enough to give us a massive discount for our audience of 50%. So use the code OZPROP, click the link below, get a copy today, and start learning and getting on your commercial property investing journey.
Oh, Jeff, you're on.
I muted myself. I was saying something profound. So good on me.
Oh, we missed it.
So many questions.
I have to watch the action replay.
Yeah. We had heaps of questions. So I think this one's a quick one because it says you said you use your own feaso sort of program, but what sort of, apart from what sort of kind of other feasos are out there that you might like to look up if you're not?
Oh, there's a couple out there. Fee Study, FEASTUDY by DevFeast. That's been around since probably 1989. I know Mark Andrews, who built that. He was a valuer. You can buy that. There's quite an extremely powerful one called Estate Master. That'll cost many thousands, but that's the one a lot of commercial valuers use. And of course, there's ours, but you'd have to buy my property development program to get that one.
You also get access to understanding Bob's mindset though as well, which I think is arguably priceless.
Yeah. Do you think of development as just as a process, like a step-by-step checklist of things to be done?
Yeah, you have to, because you got to tick them off. So every project's a little bit different, but you have to have some structure to it, and like tick sheets, check sheets, like to so you don't miss anything. You need to be organised to be a property developer. You can't be sort of slapdash, haphazard. She'll be right, mate, sort of thing, or she won't be right, mate.
Yeah. This is an interesting one. Staging development costs more to do, as in staging the property itself, or staging the.
Well, when you say costs more, it
does.
it does a little bit, but if you didn't stage it and built the whole lot, it'd cost you heaps more. Like for example, the retirement village I'm doing is 99 homes. if I was to go straight out there and build those 99 homes, and like all the earthworks and building the homes, it would probably be a slightly less dollar value than me doing it in chunks of 20. The problem is it'd take me 3 years to sell them based on our sales rate. And so I'd have all that interest on all that, earthworks and roadworks and houses. And I wouldn't be seeing that back, progressively over 3 years. And I've seen developers go broke, doing too much. When you stage, quite often on something like a land subdivision, like a larger one, you generally stage about nine month sales. So if you were say you're doing a land subdivision and your sales rate's 3 a month, 9 threes are 27. So your stages should be somewhere around that 27 or 30. You don't want to build 3 or 4 years supply, because you'll bleed to death on the interest.
Yeah, it's kind of about that going slow to go fast mindset, rather than trying to just race out the gate, and then next minute you sort of, if you don't sort of sell them, you've got that holding cost, which
and you peak. Without getting complex, the peak debt, that your maximum loan's a lot lower when you stage. Because you're only building a stage at a time, and you've got money coming in from earlier stages, so you're sort of paying your loan off as you go a bit. So that's why staging's great. But you need a project of a sufficient size to stage. You wouldn't stage a splitter. I don't know, you could. I mean, I've seen people stage a 4 townhouse project, like if it's been between like 2 street frontage, like particularly it's front and back streets. You can sort of do 2 and then do 2 later. You can do that.
Oh yeah.
I mean, normally you wouldn't, but for some people, because the debt's lower, if you do them 2 at a time. Now you might do 2, sell them, reduce your debt, do the other 2. You can get into a project like that with less capital, with less equity. Same thing as if you did a splitter and built 2 houses, you could split the land, which you have to do. You have to have 2 lots, but you can build 1 house, sell it, use your profit to reduce your debt on the second one, go and build the second one. But if you had more money, you might just say, I'll just build both of them at the same time and sell them.
Yeah, because you're probably increasing
one at a time.
Yeah,
I mean, you could do. Some people might not have enough equity to do 2 at the same time, but they could do 1 at a time. Well, do 1 at a time if that's what works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, this is what I love about development and subdivision. Like as I said, we purchased a subdivision site, and based on the zoning rules, is we can fit 2 townhouses on the back, but we don't want to build the townhouses and put all the money into it because it's going to take a long time, and we just want to return that capital a lot faster. But we can't subdivide and split the land because council can't see the 2 townhouses built, and they probably won't accept them. So what we have to do is sell as 1 lot at the back. But there's so many opportunities there because we can buy the whole lot, and eventually if it doesn't work out, we can sell the house with the subdivision. Or we can sell the house with the subdivision and the DA attached to it. Or we can sell the front house, keep the back lot. Or we can keep the back lot, sell the front house. Or we can keep the back house built. There's so many options. There's so many exits. And I think that people get a little bit too stuck in the way.
Overcomplicating it, I think.
I'm going to move. Yeah, exactly. I'm going to lose money on here. I put $500,000 into this. I could lose $500,000. Well, no, you might lose $50,000. You might lose your stamp duty and your sales costs, but you may, on the upside, have a lot more of an opportunity. And there's so many great exit strategies that you can go through.
Yeah, just on 2 lots.
Just on 2 lots.
6, 7, 8 exit strategies.
Yeah.
Are there those type of exit opportunities in larger lot subdivisions?
Oh, well, I mean, only to a degree, but I mean, with larger subdivisions, I mean, there's the option always of, just selling lots, or you could sell some to builders. You could joint venture with builders. You could build specs and sell them. I mean, there are some options in that respect. I've worked for some of the big development companies in the past where we did like large subdivisions, maybe 800 lots, and if we did a 40 lot we might we might give 10 out to builders on builders terms, where they don't have to pay for the land straight away. Then we might, build 10 houses and just sell them as specs. And then others, we might work at house and land pack, just different things, cut the 40 up into different exit strategies out of the same stage of land.
So I got a question around joint venturing with builders, because we're looking at renovations at the moment. One of the builders we had in yesterday, he's saying he's doing his own kind of developing. But I was just thinking through for him, like, what is the benefit to a builder of joint venturing and vice versa? Because I imagine in my head, I think I know the benefits, but could you take us through what the benefits of that is?
I've never been a big fan of joint venturing with builders, unless because what are they going to do? What do they give you? Are they prepared to build it at cost?
Yeah.
Well, that's not much.
Most
of the builders I've worked with, like, their margin's about 10%. So, like 10% of 350,000 is 35. So I'm going to save 35 on a townhouse. Well, that's not going to really help me a lot. I'd rather just anybody who's just got some cash and come into the deal. I did do a joint venture once with a builder, but I told him just charge normal price, for the townhouses, but put capital in. And I mean, what you need is cash. I don't need a house built cheap. That's not going to do a lot for me. I want capital. I want to cover 30% of the costs. So if you want to be a joint venture partner, come in and do that. And I can tell you the build costs, like a normal townhouse, as a percentage, probably the townhouse is probably about 45% of all your costs. So if you're saving 10% on that, you're saving 4.5% of all your costs. Well, but I need 30% of the cost as equity to do the deal. You're doing nothing for me. No thanks.
That's kind of what I was thinking, because I was like, how does it sound? Because it just doesn't. I suppose if they're bringing cash to the deal, then there is aligned incentives, because they're sort of really going to go hammer and tong to make sure the project gets built to the best quality and as quickly as it can be.
Yeah. Anytime I've ever done joint venture with a builder, I treat him the same as any other investor. He has to put cash in the deal, and you'll get the building contract as well. And he can, as long as the price is arm's length, he can make a profit out of the building contract. I'm not working him over, and make a fair and reasonable profit. That's fine. But come in as an equity partner or loan partner, whatever you want to do, But yeah, there's just not enough in it if they just waive their profit margin.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
This was an interesting one. How do you deal with objections once going to development site advertising?
I think there's one for Bib. Is there somebody else?
Who's Bib? Yeah. Alter ego.
That's all right. I think I is next to O on the keyboard, because I often sign off as Bib, so it's probably the same thing. How do you deal with objections development? Well, certain councils have different ways of doing it, but I guess you got to have a look at the objections. What are they? And first of all, you have to categorise. Are they frivolous? Like the NIMBY, not in my backyard. When I came here, I never wanted a townhouse development beside me. Well, that's fine. Sorry about that, but like, there's no town planning grounds for complaining like that. So work out what's frivolous.
Zoning first.
Yeah, it's funny stuff. And so work out what's frivolous and non-frivolous. And the stuff that's non-frivolous, look, there might be some grounds in there. It depends whether you've got a fully compliant application. So when you put a development application in, if you tick absolutely every box according to the town plan, it should be approved. I mean, there should be no reason why it wouldn't be approved. And if it ends up in court, it'll be approved. Frivolous and non-frivolous, and sometimes you can supplicate somebody. They might say, it might have something to do with privacy. So you can offer to, put screens up in front of, windows or do whatever you need to do to overcome. It's not a town planning issue they're complaining about. It might be a personal issue. I had one, we had some townhouses with the road coming down one boundary, and the road not in the middle. The road didn't come in the middle; it came down one side. A bit of a problem with that neighbour, and so he was more interested in cars coming and going in the traffic. So basically, we just flipped it over and put the road on the other side, and he was happy.
Easily solved.
You know, it might have cost me
Complaining
$300 or $500
Yeah.
get the architect to, you know, flip her over. But he was happy then. So, and it wasn't a town planning thing. There wasn't anything wrong with town planning. It's just that I was like, well, okay, if that's what it takes to make you happy, it didn't really matter to us. It wasn't a solo orientation thing. It didn't really create any dramas for us. So we did it.
Oftentimes, I think developers, a really good developer is going to be somebody who can communicate effectively. Because if the person sort of who sort of sees that and says, well, they're getting knocked back there, or they're getting rejected, and then they sort of say, well, no, I'm gonna fight this as hard as I can, rather than simply saying, well, what actually is the problem, and what tool do I need to solve that? Going to challenge that at X, Y, and Z is probably not going to be.
We had a guy once who didn't like the color of the colorbond roof we're going to put on. Now that's obviously frivolous.
Yeah.
But like it wasn't a big thing for us to just change a color palette a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
And that got rid of him. So it was probably worth it, you know?
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, don't dig your heels in, because at the end of the day, it's not about emotion for you. It's about a return on investment. And can you get a return on investment with sky blue, or can you get a return on investment with, you know, navy blue? Like, what's going to be the getting it done? This is a great question that's come up here. What is the best place? Where is the best? Maybe not where is the best place to find a developer to joint venture with if you have the capital to invest but no experience? And I guess that's a great one that I would like to unpack with you a little bit, because do you see this a lot where people go to a developer and throw their money at them and try and learn the process as they go along, but that person is not necessarily an educator?
I
do.
do
Have the best interest.
I sure do. Yeah, I do see that. And you know, it's not always a happy relationship. I think, you know, I'm not biased in saying
plug yourself here. You can plug yourself here.
You know what it is? This thing keeps doing it. I keep bumping it with the can. I'll get rid of this can. I think if you want to learn property development, do a course. Find yourself a good property development course and do that, and learn about property development. And if you want to get your hand held, do a mentoring program with somebody who's experienced. In terms of throwing money into a project as an investor, that's fine. It's a good way to make money if you choose the right people to do that with. But I wouldn't mix it up, because I've seen a lot of people, I've seen a lot of, you know, sort of smaller developers, not necessarily really experienced ones, who are looking for investors, and as an extra hook to the investor, not just the interest rate they're going to pay or the profit share, they say, oh, I'm going to teach you all about property development. I've never seen it happen, because first of all, they don't really want to be an educator, but they do want their money. And they don't know how to do it, and they don't really want to do it. And nearly every investor I've ever heard who was promised that never got what they delivered. They got, you know, a monthly report, because they just don't want people tagging around having to teach them on the way through, really, probably, because that's not what their calling is, not what they do. And it always usually ends pretty unhappy, but it's a great hook, and a lot of people use it. But yeah, well, I think, like, if you really want to learn. And if you want to invest, and you can do both, but I wouldn't use that as a hook. Haven't seen it happen. And look, if you're going to be an investor, choose wisely. I think it was that. Remember that with the chalice, you know, he chose wisely. What was that? That movie years ago, anyway. Raiders of the Lost Ark or something. But choose wisely who you invest with, because there's some unhappy tales out there, you know.
Yeah, what are some of the red flags that that pop up to you straight away when you're like, oh, I know you're not a good one. What are some of those red flags?
High interest, a ridiculously high interest rate. Well, we've seen a lot of stuff in the paper, and I don't have to name the person involved, is offering 50%. Now it's all collapsed and gone to putty. Well, I don't know. It might be before the courts. I probably shouldn't mention the person's name, but anyway, it's out there.
No need.
And look, somebody joined our mentoring program who'd actually invested with this particular individual, and I said, "Well, you won't see that money again." He was offering 50%. You can't pay somebody 50% interest on their money and make a profit out of a property development, you know. And sure enough, They raised something like $14 million, and it's all gone. Everyone lost their money.
Yeah, I think I might actually know, but
yeah. So look, the first thing it needs to be what sort of like market interest rates. Not something. If it's our story, if it's looks too good to be true, whatever it is. So, yeah, so that's one thing. I mean, I've actually got an ebook on I wrote for investors who are looking at investing in property developments because I got sick of seeing so many people get hurt, and there's a lot of things you should look for. I mean. Well, experience is it their first project, their 10th project, or their 100th project? I mean, experience counts, is it that?
Proven track record.
Yeah. Does the investor have any? Does the developer have any of their own money in the deal, or is it all from investors? There's nothing right or wrong about these things. They're just things I'd like to ask. What's the security? Most people don't even ask. They throw money at people, and it could be unsecured.
So what do you mean? What do you mean by that? What's security?
Well, you think of like say you buy a house and the Commonwealth Bank lends you the money. What do? Well, you've got a loan document with them, and they take a registered first mortgage over your house. That's their security. So if you don't pay up, thanks giving your house. But like if with a joint venture, let's say somebody joins you in a joint venture, and they're in there, they're on the title, they're on the loan, you're sort of all together. It's a joint venture. That's okay because you both sort of own the land. But if it's somebody just lending money to a developer, that's what I call a loan partner. I sort of mentioned that early. So they're not part of the deal. They're not on the title. They're simply lending money to the developer. And that's fine. That's good. Lots of that stuff happens. But so you need a loan document, how much interest they're going to get paid. When does the interest get paid? Or normal loan document. When does the principal get paid back? But what's the security? A loan document's no security. What happens if everything goes bad? You waive a loan document. They won't get you any money. So, there's things like mortgages and second mortgages and personal guarantees and caveats and all these things that can be used. But a lot of people, inexperienced people, might lend money and they don't look for that. So it's basically unsecured. So there's a problem.
Or like just a standard 1 into 2, 1 into 6, 1 into 4 development. What's the most common security that you see? Is it caveats? Is it second mortgages?
Caveats and second mortgages are the two common ones. A caveat prevents the title from being transferred, but it actually doesn't give you any right to get your money.
Yeah, because the bank will always get paid for, or whoever the first mortgages will get paid.
A mortgage can get your money back, so you can't force a sale or a situation with a caveat. All you can do is prevent somebody from selling the land. That's all a caveat is, and you have to have a commercial interest to lodge a caveat. Some caveats are lodged and they're frivolous; they get thrown out. But assuming you got a legitimate caveat and you lodge it on the title, all you can do that doesn't get you your money back. It just stops them from selling the land. Yeah. Whereas if you had a registered mortgage, even if it was a second mortgage, that is at least something. But the first mortgagee always stands above it. But there's a lot of questions I'd ask before I do a second mortgage, e.g. what's the LVR of the first mortgage?
The first question that comes to mind is how much, what LVR is the first mortgage? Because if you got
you're a smart LVR, man, because that's the first question to ask. If it's 50% LVR, that means there's 50% left for the second. So if everything goes to putty, you'll probably get your money back. If it's 80 or 90%, no way in the world. By the time, if you've got an 80% LVR on a first mortgage and there's a problem,
sell it
by the time you've got, time goes on, interest at penalty rates, lawyers, agents, auctions, sales, that 20%'s gone. The first mortgagee is okay. That 20% just got them out of trouble. Second mortgagee hung out to dry. But because if there's no problems, that doesn't matter. Everyone's happy. So look, I don't want to scare people, but I'm saying this. From an there's good money to be made out of property development if you're an investor. You just got to do it properly. And our database is full of investors that have made lots of money for 20, 30 years because it's done properly. A lot of capital raisings, they're not all legal. They're not all compliant. Just got to be careful.
There was another question that came up. Hey guys, I got a question in quick. If you're fortunate enough to develop a few vacant lots of land, is it worth building on to sell or hold? Are you better off selling vacant land to buy established property elsewhere? Very specific question.
Lots of land. Is it worth building on to sell or hold? Well, I wouldn't be holding vacant land.
Yeah, because there's what's the income coming in?
No. No, there's no income. There's nothing to negative gear if you go on the other way. Selling,
Kind
look,
of
in terms
the
of
land banking kind of is what they might be getting at. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'm not a huge fan of land banking. I like to do a deal and make my money. And when I develop, I like to keep some stuff too. You know, don't sell everything. I mean, that's how you get cheap investments. Develop your own. Hey,
Pay wholesale, not retail.
well, pay cost, not wholesale or retail.
Oh, cost.
But that's what we do. That's what developers do. But back to that question. I mean, in terms of a subdivision, obviously it must make enough profit or you wouldn't do it. And so you can just look at the next step. Just do another feasibility. Okay, I've got a block of land now. If I can build a house for $380,000 on that block of land, do proper feaso, what can I make? Well, if you could make another, I don't know, $60,000 or $70,000 or $80,000 or whatever it is, well, you might think, gee, I might do that, or I might do that on one of the lots and sell the other two. Like we were talking about before, Joe. There's so many exit strategies. It's what you can afford to do. It's whether the profit's there or not.
Yeah, it sounds like he could sell half of the land and then use that capital to build half of the lots, right? The other half of the lots. Like, there's so many options.
It's probably also too hard to say because depends on what this.
You got to look at the numbers. Yeah.
And what they want to, what they're sort of doing in their lives and all that sort of stuff.
I'll tell you where you don't develop in cheap areas because it costs the same to build. It costs the same to build. All your consultants are the same. The cost of finance is the same. The cost of GST is the same. Marketing's a percentage, but you don't do it. You won't make any profit.
Well, I feel like that's a good little insight. What's the minimum that you wouldn't look at to build?
It's hard to put a dollar value because it depends where you are. But like if you think of a town, think of Adelaide if you like. Think of the poorest suburb in Adelaide and think of the wealthiest suburb in Adelaide. And if you were to build this particular, I've got a design here, this particular 180 square meter townhouse, if you built that in the poorest suburb, it'd cost you exactly the same as if you built it in the most expensive suburb.
And it's not going to sell
in the poorest suburb, as a percentage of the end value, that build price would be way too high. It wouldn't be 45%, could be 60% or whatever. So although you get the land cheap, by the time you add in all the other things that are fixed costs, construction, consultants, council contribute, they're all fixed. No matter what suburb you do, they're all fixed. The only thing that changes, what you pay for the land, what you sell for the end product. And so in a poor suburb, you can't get the land cheap enough. The price you'd have to pay for the land would be like way less than what a house is worth. So it's very hard. If you look in really cheap areas, the only thing that gets built is big projects where they can get a big block of land. It's just, vacant land. It's cheaper and what gets built in there will be cheap. It'll be an L-shaped kitchen with a dining in there, like cut all the size down. There won't be separate toilets. They'll be in the bathroom. There's a whole heap of things you do and they'll be stacked quite a few in a row to reduce the perimeter wall. Which costs have a lot to do with the perimeter wall as well. And you just build cheap. Don't think because it's cheap, everybody can afford it. It must be good. I'll build that so that everyone can afford it.
It's not a field of dreams. Build it and they'll come.
No, not there. No.
So is there one of the questions I get a lot is when can I go into development? Like how much money do I need to actually make this happen for me?
Yeah. Well, if you don't have enough money, you're going to have to use investors' funds. But we've got heaps and heaps of people through our program who have gotten up and started with investors' funds. I mean, I accidentally did it myself with the vendor finance deal. So I did my first project with no money, even though I didn't know what I was doing. Thank God. Tony did. And you know what the second deal I did was? A joint venture with an equity partner. It was my sister's boyfriend, Keith, at the time. He was an earth mover. He saw me make all this money and without using any money. And he said, how'd you do that? I said, pretty smart, Keith. And he said, I want a bit of that. He said, I've got some money. Find me a deal and we'll do it together. And true to his word, I found a deal that worked and Keith put the money in, the equity in. We did the deal. We both made money. So that was a different type of strategy. That was a joint venture with an equity partner. 2 deals. Now I haven't put 5 cents in yet and I've done 2 deals. So you can get off the ground. And these days I teach a lot of creative strategies, a way to structure deals with little or no money. I worked out the other week, or a couple of months ago, somebody asked me, I've done about $300 million worth of projects by putting no money in.
Wow.
Out of my 1.3 billion that I've done, 300 million of that is putting no money in at all. And that's just using different sorts of creative ways of doing stuff, you know?
Yeah, but you added value in some other way, and you
sure, you got to do that.
Got educated on what you needed to do and what the process was, and you saw an opportunity of saying, okay, I can cover that bit. This section I can cover. I can be the guy that finds the site. I can be the guy that develops the site. I can be the guy that project manages the buildings. You can do all of that, and that's one of the questions one of the key questions I want to ask. How can people learn more about you, Bob, and what you do? Because you do have an amazing course that I've actually spoken to a number of people that have done it, and then also done other course providers, because you've been in the industry 30 years, you've done $1.3 billion worth of projects, and you're not paying me to say this, but I have heard amazing things about your program. So how do people learn more about that, and to see if that's going to be, fit with something for them?
Yeah, I guess a good place to start would be to go to our website, which is propertymastermind.com.au. We just there you go. Is that it? Oh, there you go.
I had it prepared.
Oh, thanks.
I had it pre-prepared.
This one I prepared earlier.
Yeah, I mean, if you go there, you can learn a bit more about myself, a bit more about Hillary, what we do, some of our courses. But like I've been teaching property development for a couple of decades, really. In fact, pretty well everybody out there that's got a course for students in one time or another. But that's cool. I love them. But that's. I mean, some people say. Some people have this attitude that if you teach, it's because you can't do. You know that old thing about the university professor. They teach business, but because they never own one.
Coaches as well. Sports coaches, they become coaches because they can't play.
Yeah. Well, I was a developer for I think 25 years or something before I ever started teaching property development. But it was after I wrote a book. But I found I really enjoyed it. I didn't realize how much I was going to enjoy it, but I'm never going to stop property developing because I love that too much too. But the thing is, you can do both. You can be a developer and teach it. And so with my own developments, I've actually got like the retirement village I'm talking about. I got a business partner in that who manages that project all the time. So I put about 4 hours a week in that. It's a $50 million project. 4 hours a week's all it takes me. And so that and Hillary's got a few projects. We do our own stuff, But most of our time is helping other people get into the industry, and get a start. And whether they've got a lot of money or not doesn't really matter. We'll show them how to get into deals.
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things that I haven't really heard too much about, and maybe it's because I don't go directly seeking it, but you kind of handhold people through the entire development process, making sure that they, don't make common mistakes. And, if you can make this development 1 to 2 to 3% better, there's an ROI straight away. And then they get the education of learning how to go through it.
Well, we've got a base course, and you can do the course and learn, and that's great. Head out on your own, do great. Or we do have a high level mentoring program where we really handheld people all the way through. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to thank you, Bob, for even in your answering of the joint venture kind of question, you just see your passion and your authenticity, because there's very few people out there that are that after being sort of doing something for 20 to 30, 40 years have the same passion about what they're doing. So, and they're just, I suppose, interested in hoping that people get the right kind of information as well, because yes, whilst they are paying for it as well, you are sort of also putting out some great podcasts which people can learn from. So I appreciate you jumping on and spending nearly close to 2 hours with both of us.
Yeah,
it's tremendous. Yeah. I'll tell you one thing: you can't learn how to do property development on the internet. You're going to need more than that. Wherever you go, you're going to need more than
that. Perfect. Well, Bob, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for taking the time and giving us a good talk through of what development is. I feel like this is a great foundational course in itself, and we will catch you up. Yep. Yeah, we'll catch you up soon. Thank you very much. Let's go buy a property. See you guys.
Been great.
Hey, everybody.
Catch you later.